Because people are the ones that create the solutions. They come up with the processes, they come up with the structures. But what's the key to unlocking the potential of people? People wanting to go the extra mile, to push the boundaries, take the risk. And the key to unlocking the potential, I think, are leaders and leadership. So I think the leadership plays a tremendous part in, I think, how Singapore have transformed from third world to first. And I think in the same way, leadership will really matter as well as we go forward in a very different era where society is also moving on and evolving. The key thing about leadership really is about values. It's about who you are and what you stand for that makes someone prepared to follow you.
Hello and welcome. I'm Maria Ressa. Let us talk about leadership in Singapore, the city-state that went from third world to first in less than 3 decades. Joining us today is a former general. He became the head of the Ministry of Manpower and now heads Family and Social Development. Minister Chuan-jin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
How do you describe Singapore today?
I think Singapore continues to be, in many ways, a miracle that continues to unfold. I'm not sure whether all Singaporeans look at it that way because we live here and we see it growing and I think we often take it for granted.
So if you were in a sentence to say what made Singapore work, what would it be?
I think leadership in many ways. And why I say that? Well, I mean, there are obviously many factors.
Yeah.
People plays a big part, and we all know people are our only resource. And it's really about people, because people are the ones that create the solutions. They come up with the processes, they come up with the structures. But what's the key to unlocking the potential of people? Competency obviously is one part that's important, but that's in some ways the low-hanging fruit. It's not easy, but it's something that can be done. But people wanting to go the extra mile, to push the boundaries, take the risk, and to really work hard and to really try to achieve something beyond what they as individuals can achieve. And the key to unlocking the potential, I think, are leaders and leadership. We were very blessed with our first generation of leaders. Our recently departed Mr. Lee Kuan Yew and his generation of leaders. I don't know of any other parallels, but where you have a group of people who shared such common perspectives and values and building up a Singapore that's clean and corruption-free and where the focus is really about doing what's right for the people and the nation. So I think the leadership plays a tremendous part in, I think, how Singapore have transformed from third world to first. And I think in the same way, leadership will really matter as well as we go forward in a very different era where society is also moving on and evolving.
What are Singaporeans looking for in their leaders today? I mean, you're talking about a generational change, Lee Kuan Yew to this generation of leaders.
Well, one of the fundamentals about leadership, I think, is about trust. You lead because people are following you. If no one's following you, you're not really a leader. I mean, you can call yourself a leader, but or you have a particular appointment. You may be the president, you may be the CEO, you may be the manager, but that is just a appointment. It doesn't make you a leader. You're a leader because people are prepared to follow you. Right? People may do the things they need to do because it's their job, they're required to by law, but to, again, go the extra mile, to genuinely want to follow, that's where leadership comes in. So the question is, the key thing about leadership really is about values. It's about who you are and what you stand for that makes someone prepared to follow you. And people may not always agree with you, they may not even necessarily like what you're proposing, but because there's that element of trust, they are prepared to follow. So the question, of course, is how do you then engender that trust? So I would say that a big part of it continues to be able to inspire that level of trust with our people. There are a lot more expectations today as well. What people are looking for, I think, is to be inspired and to have leaders that they can trust and follow. But they're also looking to be engaged. And that's where I think it's a bit different. Perhaps more pronounced now because in the past, when we were very much a developing nation, there were preoccupation with other needs, really existential needs, your job, security, basic welfare. So much as these things are important, let's sort out the fundamental things first. And when we look at leadership in government, there are expectations, but quite different. Today, some of these aspirational concerns come to the fore a lot more. And I think rightfully so, because we have actually moved where some of these existential
you're a victim
needs,
of your success.
in a sense, right? I mean, you've become more successful. So some of those basic things which preoccupied our parents' generation no longer quite preoccupy us in the same way. We're now looking at self-actualization.
Right.
So while fundamentals of leadership remain, but the nature of that interaction between leaders and people is also evolving in quite significant ways.
Lee Kuan Yew and the first generation leaders were very top-down. Lee Kuan Yew had a vision, he was a visionary. This generation, your generation, what is different and what drives you as a leader now?
Well, I do actually think that the fundamentals remain important, which has got to do with yourself. You have to be quite clear about your own values, why you're doing what you're doing, because you do need to be consistent. You do get swept along by expectations, what you should be, what you should say, both from yourself, both from the public, both from the people around you. And you have to struggle with who you are as a person. And that was something that I learned very early on in the military. While some will think that because you're from the military, it's very hierarchical, what's all this about engagement? But the funny thing is that the army, in our context, focus a lot on engagement because we are national service military. There are a lot of conscripts. There are a lot of people who come in because they're required to come in.
Yeah, every Singaporean male has to join the military.
At age 18, right? But how do you then inspire them to believe? Now, they will do what they need to do. They will make sure they don't get into trouble. But to believe in the cause, to apply your heart and soul into training because you believe that this place actually is worth defending, should anything happens. That's where leadership comes in. And leadership is about, again, your values.
Right.
While you may be popular, doing things that they would like you to do, but I think you can erode confidence as well because they know that you're just being populist. Because when it comes to the crunch, can I count on you to hold on to what is important? So that part is important. And of course, engagement. How do your soldiers feel engaged? Do they feel looked after? Do you feel that you genuinely care for them? How do you connect with them in a way where you don't have that barrier or stuck in your ivory tower and people see you for who you are? Because that's where, in Chinese, you talk about guanxi and the connections. That's very real in any form of relationships.
Let me ask you about you talked about purpose and meaning. Well, that's what you alluded to when you're talking about the military. Jemaah Islamiyah, when it was here, there were leaders of Jemaah Islamiyah who were Singaporeans. They were looking for purpose and meaning. In the 90s into the 2000s, there was a resurgence of religious groups. Singaporeans are wealthy. They don't have to worry about housing. They don't have to worry about their salary. So purpose and meaning is a key driver here. What is that? What are they looking for?
I think it's very individual. I don't think as a state you can mandate that this is therefore our purpose and meaning as a nation. Individuals do need to reflect and they do need to consider what it is for them. And I suppose religion, of course, is at a very different level. You have individuals who get swayed or who genuinely believes in a cause because of what they read, whether true or untrue or half true. And it happens. And we see that happening all over the world. But I suspect sometimes it's also filling up a void.
Yes.
So I think for us really it's about filling up that void. At a basic existential level, I think you do need to provide for jobs, opportunities, education, healthcare.
The things that Singapore has already done.
Yes, but it's things that we should not take for granted either. Right. It seems like it's there and we all assume that we just continue to work, but it doesn't. You do need to work at it, and you do need to keep it sustainable. Healthcare, for example, with the demographics that we are facing and which every country will face, to keep it sustainable for the long term, not easy at all.
Right.
So those things remain, and I don't want to say that it's no longer important. I think it remains still incredibly important.
It's a challenge.
And you still have got to work at it. But the other part of it, the aspirational part, how do you fill up that void? How do you provide that sense of purpose? Because again, it comes back to people, right? We talk about leadership and unleashing their potential. Now, when people begin to care for others, when you begin to believe that perhaps there's something more than just me and myself,
right,
you begin to work for others. You begin to work for the broader community, and collectively, it all adds up to caring about something much larger than yourself. And when you care for others, you're motivated to push the boundaries, I think that's where you figure out the solutions. Do we know what the future is going to be like? We can project, you do your scenario planning, you have your programs, processes in place, but it's the people, again, that will make it happen. The people that will adapt, the people that will change when trends change. But they are doing that because they actually care about something. So how do you bring about that sense of care? So that it's no longer just a selfish nation.
How do you do it?
How do you do it? Well, in schools, we have a program, what we call Today Values in Action, where kids are supposed to do some of the community work, outreach work, and they're required to clock up a certain number of hours for points, which is kind of horrific if you think about it that way. Right? Surely it should be completely voluntary. But I've come to accept that, when I counted
this is part of where Singapore sometimes gets,
so it's like,
becomes the butt of jokes, right?
Yeah, but I was a bit horrified when I came across this as a parent. Yeah. But I very quickly realized that if you didn't have this, parents may not actually support the notion of your children doing this work. Now, it all starts at home, but I've known leavers in the families. But if you do the right things in the right way, and if children in schools actually begin to participate in some of these activities, they are powerful platforms on its own. Because when you give and you actually engage and care for others, there's a transformative effect. And you see many children actually wanting to continue even after they finish their acts. So they may have started for various reasons, but it's such a powerful platform. And we actually believe that in giving that we receive, then that is going to be that vehicle for change. Now, is it far-fetched? Conceptually, I think it's doable. It's not easy, but you can begin to see how perhaps we can bring this on board through different programs. Because big aspirational ideas need to be translated into something that's workable. Because it's like Rajaratnam always says, it's a democracy of deeds, not words. Words easy. We all have conceptual and high-flowing ideas that sounds really good, but can you do it? You need to be able to translate into something practical. It may not sound aspirational. It may sound, as you say, a butt of jokes. But, well, in real life, things need to be practical. But big ideas, vision, needs to be executed at very basic levels as well.
Singapore is at the forefront of using technology. Social media fragments. Social media gives voice to people who don't understand necessarily in the same way. And it's almost the opposite. It's a bottom-up approach to Singapore's top-down. How are you dealing with this? What does this look like now for
Grappling with it. To me, social media is a neutral platform. I think it's neither good nor bad. It's a platform which actually I think has transformed interaction between governments and people. Today, you have a means of actually tapping on the full potential of a population. So if you look at the positive end, you literally are tapping on the entire wisdom of the entire nation. And as people become more educated, and because of internet, they've become a lot more informed, you're in a way crowdsourcing, right? In fact, a lot of the changes that we put in place, actually a lot of it it's not from the opposition. It's actually, funnily enough, it's actually from the people. Because they are and some of them offer far better solutions than what perhaps the opposition, because of their politicians. They are very careful not to commit themselves to positions so they have maximum space. But citizens are pushing us, actually sometimes sending in emails and Facebook messages with really quite involved ideas. And as you begin to SenseMake and pull together different things, some things become a lot clearer. Some things we're also looking at doing, but the nuancing of those policies can adjust because of inputs. So that's a big strength. But it also amplifies things. So you can amplify the positive, but you can also amplify the negative. So as in all societies, you have no perfect societies, and Singapore certainly is not perfect. There are lapses, there are things that fall between the gaps. For example, in my previous portfolio, you deal with foreigners who work in Singapore, right? Jobs. Yeah. Are there abuse cases? Yeah. There are. Will I be able to ever completely eradicate it? No. But by and large, I think Singapore is a good place for people working here. Many of your compatriots, Filipinos who work here.
Is it something like 250,000?
I don't know the specific numbers, but many of them do have very positive experiences. But are there those who have negative experiences? For sure. Right? But what are the numbers? Now, I'm not downplaying the incidences, but in the overall scheme of things, I think it's a good experience. Singaporeans do treat others well, but are there isolated cases? But when you amplify these stories on social media, it takes on a different dimension, right? And it becomes emotive. That's the power of storytelling. Right. You tell one story and you assume the whole world and the whole landscape is like that, but
Right.
it's one story.
Right.
And sometimes the story is not even completely true or half true.
Right.
And then you have... So those who are using that space for various reasons know that. You change the headlines, content might be exactly the same. We will read it through different lenses. And they do that because they know people actually don't read the articles. They read the headlines, they glance a couple of first liners, and that's it. The rest of the article may be completely different, right? But that's the real world. That's what's happening today.
Correct.
We have a lot of difficulties. Certainly as a government, I think we have begun to have a bigger presence. I think social media allows it. So I think we do need to be in that space to contend for that space. You're battling for the hearts and minds. You need to put across perspectives, to share your views about and to debunk myths and untruths. And unfortunately, these myths and untruths do have traction.
We have a mood meter, and it shows us that the emotion that spreads fastest on social media is anger.
Anger. So, and it's not difficult to get people angry. And it may not even be true.
Yeah.
Or best, half true. That's always the best way to do it. And what it does is it chips away at confidence, trust. It chips away at institutions, which are important, because you have societies which have completely lost faith in the whole process of politics, government. How do you actually lead and bring your country forward? Because I think that these longer term perspectives, which may not be popular necessarily, are important to keep a country going. And I think we've been successful, not perfect, but they're successful on some fronts because we've been able to look past the politics of it.
And elections coming up. Many expect Singapore to call elections this year.
Sounds like it.
What's the outlook like in a post-Lee Kuan Yew world?
So it's interesting because, in the week that we had the national mourning, so many Singaporeans came out. And I was out every day at the Parliament, walking up and down the rows of crowds of people, or at our regional memorial sites. And I was looking at the things that people were writing, and a lot of the young people who, some would have thought they wouldn't relate to Lee Kuan Yew, but actually remarkably, a lot of introspection. And you could see a lot of young, especially young people coming forward, sometimes bringing their young kids, babies in their arms, because almost realizing that their children were going to grow up in an era where Lee Kuan Yew was not part of the landscape. It was really quite emotional, and I think for many of us, it's although he's stepped down in many ways and become a lot less involved, but I guess it was like knowing that Lee Kuan Yew was there somehow gave you that confidence, because love him, loathe him, I think there was a great deal of respect and trust. And of course now he's no longer here, so in that sense it's quite watershed. But the fundamentals, I think, doesn't change. The fact that we remain vulnerable, much as people seem to think, oh, there they go again, paranoid. But the world is evolving at such great speeds. Competition today is so real. I mean, we have companies, jobs, departments being outsourced and completely relocating to Manila because graduates in Manila could do that job for a fraction of the pay. And that's globalization. And that has resulted in a hollowing out of jobs in many developed countries. Those jobs are not going back. Now, so that's a real challenge that we face today. May not seem apparent because Singapore continues to do relatively well, but it's happening. And it's difficult to get Singaporeans to realize that these challenges remain real and we need to pay attention to economic growth. But then there'll be the rolling of eyes, oh, there they go again, economic growth, GDP numbers. We have it in, we could do with slowing down, yes, and we are by tightening manpower and so on because of other considerations. So those fundamentals actually don't change. Security needs don't change. I don't believe it changes. I mean, the reality of real politics is that you are a small nation and you need to be able to wield a big stick to be able to operate as equals.
Sorry, we're talking about jobs before we move on. The foreigners, you mentioned this when you were minister at the Ministry of Manpower. There was one of the worst cases was the riot in Little India.
Yes, that's right.
what happened? I mean, where do you see this moving?
No, I don't see that as it's a function of various things. I mean, we know in India when sometimes incidents happen, it can break out in all sorts of incidents.
That's never happened in the time period.
No, not here. But I guess in many ways, when you have crowds gathering in particular places, in this case, a combination of various things, a bit of alcohol, incidences, individuals reacting. But is it chronic? Actually, no, because some people said it was chronic. But to be honest, if it's chronic, it would have been happening all over Singapore.
Right.
And you have been dealing with it for days to come.
But it seemed to have been a convergence. Singapore has long been moving away from the race riots of the 60s, and it's put in place so many things to have racial
That's
harmony, right? But you put that together with the foreign workers, the kind of fear of losing jobs, or it's jobs Singaporeans don't necessarily want, is the other thing, right?
That's why when I go abroad, I mean, our unemployment for Singapore citizens is 2.9%. It's virtually full employment, right? But yet, when you converse, you feel as if we are falling apart. We have no jobs. Foreigners are taking. So it's. But you see this happening, right? You see this happening in UK. You see this happening in the States. It's a very primordial reaction. Us, them. The silver lining in this is that we are beginning to have a very strong Singaporean identity, which is a good thing. But to be also circumspect, will we ever have zero unemployment? No. 2.9% translates to over 1,000 people, right? So
but there was a period of time when Singapore had near zero unemployment.
That's right. So the flip side of that is that there are opportunities from employers. They feel that Singaporeans can be quite picky. I'm fully aware that there are people who are unemployed. I mean, the way I look at statistics is this. You can talk about 2.9% unemployment, 3%. But to a person unemployed, it's 100% until I get a job, right? So scant consolation. We are, the conditions of the post-war growth will also not be replicated. For example, our parents' generation at that big jump, that so-called third world to first, was that whole symptomatic of the period where post-Second World War, very low developed state that we were in as nations then, that huge jump that took place, where even our parents, non-graduates, they were able to hold down decent jobs, buy a landed property, a house. But today, having that same expectation, you will not be able to realize that same aspiration. Because for one, you've uplifted so many. There's so many more graduates you're competing with. And as a secular nation, as you talk about race, religion, aspirations, and the very differing expectations that people have. So the process of engaging becomes a lot more important. Again, we may not always agree. We may not always we are not always able to meet everyone's needs and aspirations the same way, but are we still able to at least create that common space so that we can agree to disagree, but at least still establish a sufficient level of trust so that we can still go on to wherever we are going on to. Even if you talk about poverty and the poor, and there are those in Singapore, but when you compare with the poor in, say, another country, it's actually not as bad. But I mean, that's, again, it's relative.
Prime Minister Lee is expected to stay in power a few more years, but there's a new leadership. Your name has actually been tossed around by some analysts as a potential candidate for Prime Minister.
Misinformed analysts.
In this new, what things must be there for the next generation leader?
Well, I think I come back to the fundamentals. Very particular that at the end of it, especially for Singapore, and I think what we in the People's Action Party, we believe in very strongly is actually values, integrity, honesty. I mean, we are not perfect people, so we're not monks and nuns. But I think as a system, and the way we approach governance, it has to be first about people. I mean, we all have our own aspirations, every individual is out there, but you must be able to then figure out where society and people come in your nation. So that when you make policies, it is always about how it benefits our society.
But that's very similar still to the past. I mean, is there anything different?
So what is going to be different? I think it's the whole process of engaging a lot more. I know engagement is a bit of a catchphrase, but it's useful to remind ourselves actually what is engagement for and why. How do we, as we age as a nation, it's not a threat or a challenge, but it's an opportunity. A generation of Singaporeans who are going to be growing up educated, skilled, informed. How do you tap on this segment of the population to be involved and to continue to contribute economically, socially, I think the possibilities are quite endless. And that's, I think, where we are as we celebrate and look back at 50 years of achievement, which is quite remarkable. Not perfect, but quite remarkable. I think the future is really for us to define, and I think it's incredibly exciting as well.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
We've been speaking with Minister Tan Chuan-jin in Singapore on leadership moving forward in the post-Lee Kuan Yew era. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Maria Ressa.